I'm explo nani Kofi, editor of Another Africa is Possible newsletter, social justice practitioner, Pan-Africanist networker, grassroots organizer. Throughout the former colonial world, after independence, people have struggled to be in control of their resources and fight for a better life. The ruling classes in that part of the world, in association with the ruling classes in the former colonizers' lands, have made that impossible. It is necessary for others around the world to solidarize with these people fighting for social justice. The case of Venezuela, where Trump is trying to remove Maduro and replace him with somebody who has not contested elections, is an attempt by America to repeat what they have done by erasing the original natives of North America, the Amerindians, from the face of the world. Africa has to change its relationship with the rest of the world so that the architecture that had been built through the period of European and Asian-led enslavement and colonialism will be brought to an end, and the African people will be in control of every inch of their natural and human resources. There is need for peace in the world, for people to relate with one another in an atmosphere of fairness. But it seems that the invasions from the period of enslavement and colonialism have become institutionalized, in which way, at present, with a unipolar world order, America is leading in the invasion of other countries to control their resources. The British have gone around the whole world trying to loot other people's resources to use to build an empire. And at present, they don't want the people from the lands from which resources they've looted to come here and enjoy the resources which have been taken away from their lands. The resources are theirs, and it is proper that they should have the right to enjoy them where it has been brought to. The resources which I'm referring to include minerals, include the human beings which were taken from those lands. These human beings came to work here and other places which Britain was in control of, and that had built Britain into the force that it thinks it is. There is need for peace in this world so that all people around the world could live in an atmosphere of fairness and respect for one another. But it seems the institutions that were built during the period of enslavement and colonialism have become a permanent feature where war is being used in the days of a unipolar world order for America to invade particular countries and control their resources. The leading capitalist countries occupied particular countries, ruled them instead of them having their own governments. These countries in struggle have been able to establish governments. Unfortunately, many of them have the type of governments which are still controlled by the former colonizers. It is necessary for the masses of people of these countries to mobilize so that they will have governments which represent them and not those which are extensions of the colonial rule. Ghana was formerly called the Gold Coast because the British colonized the territory and gave it that name. The people of the Gold Coast struggled against British rule. The mass movements were built, but sections of the elite sabotaged the mass movements and colluded with the colonial authorities to have a controlled transition. History has been written in such a way that the mass movement which is sabotaged is not mentioned in history. I am making efforts so that there role of the masses of the people, which actually drove independence, will be known by others. And so that these lessons will help us sustain the change for true independence. Once some of us got here in the late 80s, it wasn't a common example to see Ghanaians who stand against the British establishment at the same time standing for freedom back home. Just a few of us, including myself, made this a very organized feature. As a result of that, we've inspired a younger generation of Ghanaians who are contributing in society here, and the link with society back home will contribute also to freedom developing in Ghana and independence being meaningful. Since 19 December 2018, the Sudanese masses have been demonstrating against the al-Bashir regime. They started the demonstrations in response to rising food prices. The Sudanese have a long tradition of fighting tyrants, starting from the Nimere regime in the 1960s. But after fighting one tyrant, another tyrant emerges. These times, the Sudanese seem so determined. Cameroon is one example in which neocolonialism was introduced before even independence was declared. The oldest political organization in Cameroon and the oldest indigenous political organization, the Union of the Populations of Cameroon, was formed in 1948. But because it was a radical movement, the French authorities colluded with those working in the civil service in Cameroon to be a rival organization which should rather be considered as the anti-colonial movement. The war was waged on the Union of the Populations of Cameroon right before independence, and after independence, the colluding elements of French colonialism continued this war until they killed the last most influential leader of the Union of Populations of Cameroon, Ernest Nwandi, in 1971. The Union of the Populations of Cameroon has continued in illegality to organize in that country, and it's a great example for all Africans about a movement which is consistent in its struggle against neocolonialism. And that is why the legacy of the All African Peoples Conferences, in which the Union of the Population of Cameroon was very active, is being carried forward by this organization. I was a guest of the organization in July last year and will continue supporting this organization in its struggle against neocolonialism, because I don't see any other organizations being consistent in this struggle against neocolonialism in Africa today. The All African Peoples Conference was a conference of liberation movements which were convened immediately Ghana became independent. Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, convened this conference. There have been 3 All African Peoples Conferences, one in Accra, Ghana, one in Tunis, Tunisia, and one in Cairo, Egypt. The conference in Cairo, Egypt, adopted a resolution on neocolonialism. There was supposed to be a 4th conference in Bamako, Mali, to discuss how to implement the resolution on neocolonialism. Immediately, the resolution was adopted in Cairo on neocolonialism. The imperialist forces stepped up their activities. In fact, Ghana and Mali had their presidents overthrown. Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown in Ghana, and Modibo Keita, who would have hosted the conference in Mali, was also overthrown. The governments which replaced them were not bold to continue the liberation struggle the way these governments were. Zimbabwe had an apartheid system where the apartheid regime there had a unilateral declaration of independence and named the country Rhodesia. The liberation movement took up armed struggle and fought and liberated Zimbabwe in 1980. In 1980, Mugabe became the prime minister. He later became the president. In the 90s, the trade union movement rose against the regime when economic conditions worsened. A Zimbabwe Working People's Convention led to the formation of Movement for Democratic Change. In 2000, there was the election which for the first time, through the Movement for Democratic Change, a large number of opposition members were elected into parliament, including one radical socialist lawyer, Munyarazi Gwizai. The Movement for Democratic Change also adopted the neoliberal policies which the people had rose against and which had made it possible for the group to emerge. Later, it lost its popularity, but managed to do damage in the elections to the ZANU-PF led by Mugabe, which led to the government of national unity. And after the government of national unity, the movement weakened and Mugabe grew in strength again. Conditions were still bad. So in 2017, the military took power and handed over to Mugabe's vice, Mnangagwa. He won the last elections. The masses are back on the streets. There's been serious repression in the country. What it shows is that the masses are asking for an end to the neoliberal policies, and that whether there's a coup d'etat, government of national unity, or regime change, is not giving them the solution. And the only solution is an alternative and the end to the neoliberal policies being imposed by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The Berlin Conference of 1884-1885 divided African territories among the Europeans. This split areas which had the same culture, and because of that, it had created a lot of tension in Africa, where secession movements have emerged, because the 54 African countries are all like Northern Ireland. So you have the centrifugal forces are stronger than the centripetal forces. And this is a big crisis for Africa as a continent. The only way out will be for Africa as a whole to have a confederation so that without war, the boundaries can be renegotiated. In the January 2019 issue of the Another Africa is Possible newsletter, I listed the various groups which are fighting for secession in various African countries, the various groups which have joined international organizations like the Unrepresented People's Organization, and also the Organization of Newly Emerged African States. And this means that there's a threat to the cohesion of the African countries as they are now. Since there are a number of groups and sub-nationalities which are not accepting the countries and the borders as they are now, that is a threat to the cohesion of Africa. I am an Ewe. My fellow Ewes in Ghana, in recent times, sessions have come up talking about the need for secession, talking about the need to unite the Ebes in Ghana, Togo, and Benin into one country. And government has intervened. Some people have been detained. But this kind of atmosphere means that it is very difficult for cohesion to be in the various African countries. And all this is the result of the Berlin Conference.
What's the story? How do you deal with it if the lines have been drawn and you have countries and you have, is it tribes? Or
Yeah, you have people who speak one language, have one culture. They have spoken one language, they've had one culture
but
all the
five
time.
countries or something.
And they are now in at least 4 countries. But they speak the same language, they have the same culture. So it's similar to the problem that the Kurds, for example, have. And so it's not strange that we have such a situation. In the UK at present, all the Ghanaian members of parliament are from the Conservative Party. I've been reflecting on how this developed because in the past, West Africans in politics were known to be coming from the Labour Party. It seems this has developed in Ghana over the years, that there has been a lot of right-wing influence on political thoughts. Before the independence struggle, in the course of the independence struggle, there was a lot of radical influence, and this can be mainly found in the public records of the colonial authorities, who were worried about the radical influences in the anti-colonial movement in the Gold Coast. And they managed to collude with some of the opinion leaders in the Gold Coast to work against the radical forces and the mass involvement in the anti-colonial movement. So the anti-colonial movement shifted to the right. And after the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, who was left-oriented, the politics in the country came under a lot of influence from the Western governments. And I always refer to this as the 24 February 1966 consensus. It's interesting that today, when we are doing this program, is an anniversary of the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah. So after the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah, there are a lot of anti-Nkrumah sentiment, Nkrumah seen as a representative of the left, and so public discourse shifted to the right. And this has influenced the politics in the country. So even people who associate themselves with Nkrumah now are people who are influenced by right-wing ideas more than what Nkrumah stood for. And I think that has contributed to the situation in which the Ghanaian elite have moved far to the right, and such that all the parliamentarians that Ghana produces in the British Parliament today are from the Conservative Party. The British Home Office has been deporting certain people who have lived here for a very long time, or terminating the right to permanent residence of people, or even bring it to their end their British citizenship. Examples from Ghana include Adoboli, who was a UBS trader, was working in the banking system. There has also been the NHS worker who was born in Britain, doesn't know any relatives in Ghana, and has been deported there, stripped of his British citizenship. This is part of a hostile environment which seems to have been gradually developed by the present Prime Minister when she was Home Secretary. And now that she is Prime Minister, the policy that she developed in the Home Office is being implemented and affecting people. And this hostile climate is depriving people of their rights to residence and also sending them out of this country in a way which seems to be against the fundamental human rights. It is a worrying situation in the country, and even the mainstream press has reported on these issues. In the past, the type of people who were deported were normally people who have recently arrived from the country. It was not known that bank traders, people in the financial system, who had been here all their life, have been deported. And it was not known that somebody who was born here, who doesn't know any relatives back in Ghana, is deported. And he reaches Ghana and he doesn't even know who to go to. It is important that this is discussed properly in society so that this travesty of justice can be rectified. I arrived in Britain in 1989, around the time that the Berlin Wall fell in Eastern Europe. And it was the time that Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of this country. It's the time when, after the defeat of the miners, there was also the poll tax riots. And Margaret Thatcher was brought down by the poll tax. After Margaret Thatcher, people didn't know that Labour will come into government again. And especially after Kinnock, who thought by shifting the party to the right he could win, lost election. And then came John Smith, where everybody was thinking that he was going to be the next Prime Minister, and he suddenly died. And came Tony Blair, who managed to win for Labour after a long period of time. Tony Blair's victory gave the impression that it is only the right wing that can get votes. During that time, there was a Tony Benn faction of the Labour Party, which people saw just as people for extra parliamentary politics demonstrations, but not votes, and that they could not even win the party leadership. It was a great surprise that my good old friend, Jeremy Corbyn, won as the leader of the Labour Party. Even when he filed in, he himself didn't believe that he would win. He just said it will be all over after a month. And we had invited him to Peking in Ghana for the Quilombo conference, and were expecting him and his wife to visit me in my hometown for the conference. And as the campaign started, he was more than a rock star. The crowds were piling everywhere, and it was JC all over the place. And a big surprise, after Michael Foot, people didn't think that the hard left would ever get to the top of the Labour Party. It shocked the parliamentarian so much that even a year after he was elected, he was made to contest again. Before the last election, which Theresa May called, thinking that she was going to use it to destroy the Labour Party because hard left cannot attract votes. More than half of the Labour Party MPs passed a vote of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn. After the election, when Theresa May lost, even the majority which David Cameron had, the same MPs who passed a vote of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn gave him a standing ovation in Parliament. These are how things change and how times change. And some of the changes I've observed politically over the years in Great Britain.
Very nice.